Hi, everybody. This week we are talking about leashing, training fearful dogs who um, aren't comfortable having a leash put on, maybe run away from the leash, or once they have it on, they kind of panic. We're going to talk about how to train a fearful dog, to accept being leashed happily. All right, so I have some video examples today from one of our dogs, a little pancake, who has starred in several recent videos. um, and we did have to take our time with him, teaching him to be okay having a leash put on. But I'll show you some of those steps today, and hopefully, if you're struggling with this, something will help you out with wherever you're stuck in this training. All right. So, who is this for? Today, we're really focusing on the process of training the dog to let you put the leash on them on whatever equipment you're using. The videos I'm going to show you today, Pancake was wearing a collar, and I was practicing putting the leash on the collar. But you could do the same process if they're wearing a harness. This is for dogs who run away from the leash, maybe don't like being handled at all, or maybe you can leash your dog, but they kind of cower down and hunker down until you get the leash on. Um, or maybe a big problem is after they have the leash on, if it tightens at all, they freak out. We're going to get more into that last point next week when we talk about actually walking and getting out of the house. But I'll mention it a little bit today. Some key points when you're thinking about leash training a fearful dog. Number one is do not force it. If you have no other way, if the only way you can get your dog outside to pee and stuff is on a leash, then consider setting up an indoor potty area for them, an indoor toileting area. There are a few other options. I have occasionally used a slip lead that a dog will put their head through for very brief outings, but chances are if your dog is afraid of a regular leash, they're probably going to be afraid of a slip lead. Of course, as always, use positive reinforcement to train, use treats and toys, things that your dog loves, and work at your dog's pace. And then all the other pieces that go into getting your dog out on a walk, a harness, putting a collar on, actually going out of the house and walking, we have to train separately. This is something that you may have noticed if you've been following these series of videos, is that with fearful dogs, you have to break things down into small pieces. Okay, before getting into the actual training, the leash training, I just wanted to mention that your choice of leash can make things easier or harder on you when you start this training. If you've got a dog who's really sensitive to handling, to things being on their body, think about how big the clip is. So the metal clips you see in this picture on the slide, those come in all sizes. And I would get a small light one if you can when you're starting out, if a dog is unaccustomed to having a leash on at all. I really like the ones that are the type of clip that's shown in this picture, where you can use your thumb to slide that little metal knob down to open it. There are also clips, I think actually you can't really see, I think the one on the far left of the picture that's cut off is one of these where you have to push in a lever to open the leash to get it onto the collar or harness. And those, for me at least, tend to be a lot more fumbly, and I spend more time trying to get the leash on, which is bad. With fearful dog, you want it to be quick and easy. So make sure that whatever leash you're using is really easy for you to manipulate and open the clip. How long the leash is. So leashes come in all lengths. Sometimes a shorter leash might be easier, or even just the clip, or a clip with a little bit of a leash and then an old leash maybe that you cut off so you don't have so much weight. Although think if the leash is too short, it may kind of bang against the dog's body, which could also scare them. But do think about why you might want a short or long leash. I use a long leash in these videos, and I'll talk about why that is. And then finally, leash weight. So leashes come from, really tiny, almost strings for small dogs, to thick, heavy, leather, or the thicker biothane leashes. For a dog who's just starting out learning to accept a leash, I would really recommend going with something lighter. It's already going to be a little bit disconcerting to them sometimes to start when they first feel the weight of the leash on the equipment, their harness or their collar. So lighter is probably going to be easier for you. Oh, I forgot to mention, if you have any questions during the presentation, if you put them below this video, wherever you're watching it, they'll come up for me and I'm happy to answer them. Okay, so the first step in training a fearful dog to love their leash and be leashed easily. This is similar if you've been watching the last few videos on harnessing and collar training. We do just a check it out procedure. And by that, I just mean let the dog check out the leash without you trying to do anything to them using the leash. So what you do is you sit on the floor with your side to the dog, as long as it's safe to do so. Put the leash on the floor in the beginning and let them check it out. And then as we progress, as the dog is readily approaching the leash when it's on the ground, then we'll start to hold up the leash clip a little bit. Now, what are you reinforcing the dog's, what behaviors are you reinforcing for the dog? It really depends on where your dog is starting out and where they tell you they are at any given step. But you can reinforce something as small as just looking toward the leash. You'll see in the videos I'm showing today that for the most part, Pancake was approaching and sniffing the leash, and that's what I reinforced. But you can definitely be more conservative in this. And if the dog doesn't want to approach the leash, and don't push it, use what they're giving you to start. So they look at the leash, you say yes, and toss a treat to them. Maybe they can look at the leash and take a step toward the leash. That's great too. And like I said, we're doing a nose touch here in this video today. All right, so here's little Pancake. And if you've been watching video of him, you may notice that here you're going to see a little more fearful body language, and he's kind of more hesitant than you'll see in some other videos. This is within the first month that he was up here with us at this house. Just on his new medication. I was just starting to be able to do training with him. So this is the very first time he's seen the leash. So I put it down and I want you to watch his body language. There are things I could have done better here. So you see he's kind of hesitant. He stretches to sniff it. I said yes and touched and tossed treats. When I said yes is when he kind of jerked back. And my guess is that that had to do with the way that I was leaning forward to deliver treats. You'll see me later in the video being more careful and slower with my movements when delivering treats. At this stage with us, he was still pretty suspicious of hands and of humans moving toward him in any way. Now, luckily, so here I could have, and probably what I should have done in these first 2 repetitions after that first one is say, hey, you know what? I'm going to back up away from the leash and just toss treats from farther away so that you're not having to approach the leash and me, because I was fairly close here to where the leash was. Now, lucky for me, you'll see that after these first 2 repetitions, he started to look a lot more comfortable and learn the game. Looked like he's like, oh, it's just this game where I sniff something. Oh, this is one of the first times we played it, actually. So the first 2 reps, I was tossing the treats away from him because he chose to lie down here. And I mean, for any dog, standing up from a lying down position is some effort. And for him with 3 legs, it appears to be a significant effort. So I decided to just toss the treats to him where he was when he was lying down. So here he is again. He sniffs it. I said yes. We're getting some tail wags now. He's looking a little happier. So again, what I'm looking for is him sniffing or right there, touching, little tiny nose touch to the leash. I say yes and deliver a treat. All right, so that was just the initial, hey, what's this new object? It's a leash, it's all good, it's a fun game. I'm not going to force anything on you. If you have any questions about this first step, go ahead and put it in the comments now. I'm gonna move on to the moving the clip step, first moving the clip step. All right, so I'm gonna lift up the clip and then toss him a treat. The only thing I'm asking of him is to notice me lifting the clip up and not running away. If he did run away, that would tell me I need to back up in my training, go back to some of that nose targeting probably, or move this leash farther away. So I was lifting the clip up farther away from him. You notice I'm not moving it toward him at this stage yet, just lifting it up. So, whoop, my hand's on the leash. Hey, check this out. Great. And you can see he's starting to make the connection. I lift it up. He looks at it, he wags his little tail. He knows that treats are coming his way. There, he did that on his own. I was probably taking too long breaking up treats or something, and I went ahead and reinforced that. He got up and sniffed the leash. Nice little tail wag. All right. Any questions about these first two steps? I know it can seem painfully slow, but I think this was all in one training session, maybe two, pretty short training sessions. And this is really going to pay off later as we start to get closer to actually moving a leash toward the dog, trying to actually clip it onto them. If we haven't pushed early on, then we need to build up some positive history with this thing before we start getting invasive. And it is invasive for most dogs to have our hands coming right at their neck and trying to mess around with something around their neck or on their harness. Okay, now I'm going to start moving the leash a little more toward the dog, instead of just, picking it up and showing him the clip. I'll show you a couple steps of moving that leash clip toward him a little bit and then closer to the collar, and then how we move to actually having the leash clip touch the collar, and then the actual ring where you need to clip the collar on or clip the leash on. And you would do the same with the harness. All right, so I'm just going to lift it a little bit toward him, and all he has to do is notice it, basically. And that's great. So he's hanging out. I think here I might have started asking for a nose touch. So moving his head toward the leash, which is helpful. So he just taps the clip and he gets treats for that. And you notice I'm trying to move fairly slowly and smoothly here. That will help you. All right, now I'm starting to move the clip closer to his collar. He's giving me a little side eye there. Not all the way yet, but just more into his space. And if he hangs out, watches it, doesn't try to move away, we're good. If he flinches back, and I have some examples of times where I needed to back off in the video in a second. If he flinches or backs away, that tells me, okay, that was too much. I need to try again with something easier. So just a little more under his chin there. There, I think I might have tapped the collar there just a little. Okay, I have a couple of these oopsies in here highlighted with this slide to show where Pancake gave me some sign that, yeah, that was too much and you need to back off. So here I got a little greedy. Do you see how I'm going to rewind that. He sniffed the leash hook, and then I tried to kind of pop it a little too fast under his chin toward the collar, and he shifted his weight back a little bit. I said, okay, so right away, the next rep, I'm going to go to something much easier. Just, sniff the clip again up here and have a treat. I usually try to do at least a couple much easier repetitions before starting to work back to where I was slowly. And while I know it seems like a small thing, it was just a little shift back. And wow, now you're doing all these extra repetitions. It's actually way faster to get back to where I was, probably within the same training session within a minute or two, if I back off at those small signs of discomfort rather than pushing through, then I could easily find myself set back many more steps than I actually was. Oops, this is kind of, there we go. All right, any questions so far? Okay, we're going to talk about food lures. I've mentioned before that I'm a little hesitant to use or recommend food lures with fearful dogs in many situations because it can set up a situation where the dog is conflicted. They want the food, but you've put it somewhere where they're kind of scared to go. And so they're like, oh, I want it, but I don't want it. And that can set up something where the dog will approach, take the food and then bite, or, you'll see that a lot if you see strangers trying to hand feed a fearful dog, and the dog might kind of creep forward and stretch and they really want the treat, but sometimes they'll take the treat and then bite the person's hand. So we don't want that. And I don't recommend using food lures in the first steps of this training when the leash was just on the ground. We want to watch how they approach and check it out without, we want to see how they're approaching the leash, not the food we put next to the leash. So don't put food next to the leash. Let them come at their own pace. And you're always in those early stages actually tossing those treats away from the leash. That gets them to move away, and then you can watch and see how readily do they come back. But now at this stage, I do like to use food lures carefully. I usually will present, and this will be obvious in the video, but show the dog the leash clip first, then start the food lure. And I use the food lure to get them to lift their chin, so it's easier to get the leash on the collar if you're leashing on the collar. You wouldn't have to do this with a harness, but I find it easier when I'm leashing on a collar. The reason I present the leash clip before I bring out the food lure is because I'm not trying to like trick the dog and be like, oh, look over here, food, nothing's happening, and then try to quickly, leash the dog before they notice. Because that can lead to a dog who is suspicious of food lures. They think you're trying to trick them. So always, hey, here's the leash clip. Okay, eat. I'm going to slowly move the leash a little bit, but, I'm not sort of hiding it until you're eating. And then at the first sign, be very, very conservative when using food lures. So the first sign of worry, pulling back, stopping or slowing down even with their eating, or taking treats harder, back off. All right, so let's look at some food lure use. So I'm going to show Pancake the leash first. I'm going to keep it visible. I lured his head up a little, and then I just tapped the leash clip to his collar. So I'm just touching the collar with the leash. And I'm watching his body language closely. Looks pretty good. There, I'm actually touching the ring. That's actually not the right ring, but that's okay. Because there's some, the reason I'm doing that touching of the leash clip to the ring is that it makes a little bit of like, it's metal on metal noise, a little clinking sound. So I want that in the picture before I add the weight of the leash on the collar. All right. Any questions about using food lures here? You don't have to use food lures. You could definitely do this, just, continue the process I was doing earlier, continuing to move the leash clip closer and closer to the collar. For me, I've just had success with this method. It tends to work fairly quickly. All right, we're going to talk about clipping on the leash. Finally, putting the leash on. I still use the food lure at this stage. Take the leash off right away in the beginning. So you're just clipping on and then clipping off within a couple seconds. And only increase the duration slowly where the leash is hanging on the collar or harness. Because for a dog who is not accustomed to wearing a leash, that weight is going to feel funny to them. So we don't want them to freak out. Okay, check out the leash, food lure up, clip on. I think this was the first time I clipped that on. And then I use the food lure to unclip as well. Same process. This time I'm using the correct ring on the collar. All right, so now we've got the leash on. Can we go for a walk yet? Well, maybe you can with your dog, but Pancake could definitely not go on a walk yet. So now we need to work on the feeling of having the leash on for a little bit longer periods, and how does it feel to have that weight of the leash when the dog is moving their head, taking some steps, stuff like that. So I'll show you how I did this. First I just did a little bit of head movement where I was asking Pancake to like do hand touch. So see the leash is on, and I'm doing some hand touch at different angles so you can get he is getting some of that feeling of, see the leash clip is kind of wiggling around a little bit. He's got that weight on the collar. And then I think the next thing is I'm going to try to get him to take a couple steps, and it's easy to do this with just a treat scatter in the beginning, or you can do hand target. That's fine too. Now I'm trying to get him to take more treats and also kind of walk with me. Not really, but I'm just slowly walking and putting treats down behind me to encourage him to take a few steps. Now, I should mention there's a pretty big downside to having a leash dragging like this, which I will show you in a minute. If the dog isn't used to having tension on the leash, and a lot of these dogs aren't, or if they are, it doesn't mean something good to them. Oh, here we're going to try some running. He likes, even then he was following me even that early on. He didn't want to come super close, but he would always follow me when I would leave the room. So that was a way to get him to walk several steps at a faster pace with the leash on. Now, if a dog is not used to having a leash on, not used to the feeling of tension on the leash, and you have the leash dragging and they step on it, there's a good chance they're going to freak out. They're going to panic. So I think I have an example here. So here, Pancake just stepped on the leash. He kind of bucked and freaked out a little bit and moved away. So then I waited a second, sat down as near to him as he was comfortable with, called him back and took the leash off and said, okay, we need to, we need to back up on this a little bit. All right. So now we've worked on getting the leash onto the dog, having the dog move a little bit, just feeling the weight of the leash on the collar. You may not have to work this piece separately, but I did with Pancake. I noticed that if he was dragging the leash, unless he stepped on it, we were doing okay. He looked all right. But if I picked up the other end of the leash while it was attached to him, he'd back away and look worried, basically. He did not like me picking up the other end of the leash. So I needed to break down me holding one end of the leash while it was attached to him into smaller steps. So I started just doing a little bit of lifting of the leash with me sitting down and then standing and then a little bit of movement. I think I just have a couple clips of this. So just lifting it, see my hands on the leash, nothing bad's happening. And then I'll do a little bit, bigger lifts, more of the leash in my hand there. Now I'm doing it standing up. And this is one reason I liked having this long leash for him, is because I could be pretty far away from him when I held one end of the leash, which for him was important in the beginning. So now I'm holding one end of the leash, moving around a little. I tossed some treats to him. He wasn't moving with me yet here, but he was starting to tolerate me holding one end of it as long as I didn't, was staying a good distance from him. So that is the first installment of this leash training. Next week, I'm going to talk about adding leash tension so they get used to that feeling of, because even if you always try to keep the leash loose, it is definitely not always going to be loose. Things are going to happen. There's going to be tension on the leash. So we need the dog to get used to that. And then I'm going to talk about dogs who are afraid of going for walks. So even if you've got the leash on and now your dog's kind of used to the feeling and they don't panic if they feel a little bit of tension, that doesn't mean they're going to be willing to go outside. So I'm going to include next week our early training for getting Pancake to leave the house, which did take a while. And I know many of you in the group, I have the link up here for our free Facebook support group. I know many of you in the group have dogs who are afraid to leave the house. They're afraid to go on walks. And a lot of times, most people, when you're struggling, what I hear is that you're pushing a little faster than you should. And so I want to show you how slowly we needed to go, but how successful that was with Pancake. It was slow, and sometimes it was frustrating, but he is, well, I'll show you. He now happily goes outside. All right. Any questions about leash training? A dog who's scared of leashes. I know this training isn't super exciting looking. It's a lot of tiny little steps, a lot of repetitions. But it pays off. It really pays off if you take your time. I know there are days where you don't you don't feel like doing it. And my best advice for that, I wouldn't call myself the most patient person in the world, is days where I find myself getting a little pushy, maybe I'm just going to step away from training that day. If I'm just in a little bit, I'm not a little irritable, not my most patient, just say, you know what, today I'm not doing leash training, because there's really nothing good that can come from training impatiently with a fearful dog. And that's okay, as long as you have that mindset that you say, this is going to take how long it needs to take. I can't rush it. Then it's okay if you miss a day, right? You don't have a deadline. You can't have a deadline. The dog determines the deadline. So just something to help you with this. I know it can be really tough. And if you need help, reach out to us. We are offering those short private consults now that are much less expensive than a full private consult that we start with normally. So we can help you, or in our monthly membership, which you can find on our website. That's another way to get help and encouragement, breaking it down for your own dog and having someone review your videos and give you feedback. Because this kind of training, most people, even professional dog trainers, can struggle with it. And, as a dog mom or dad, you shouldn't expect yourself to be able to do it by yourself. It's hard. It's really hard. And so having someone to stick with you and guide you is huge. All right, everybody. So no questions. If you're watching this as a recording later, go ahead and put questions under the video, either Facebook or YouTube. I'll get an alert and I'll come and answer them as best I can. And yes, have a wonderful week. I will see you next week for more on Pancake's journey toward becoming a dog who actually goes outdoors willingly on a leash and even has adventures now. And I hope that'll be encouraging to you, because I know sometimes when you're right in the middle of this, it can feel like you're never gonna get there. But almost everyone can get there as long as you take your time. All right. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you next week.